Welcome to Hocus Focus. This is Mark Diamond, and my guest today is Santos bonacci. We'll be talking to Mr. Astrotheology about all things cosmic within and without, above and below. We'll be back in a minute. And we're back. We are listening to Santos bonacci. He's a composer as well as an astrotheologist. Say hello, Santos.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about your work and the 3D nature of things.
The 3D nature of things. Why stop at 3D?
Mm-hmm.
I remember Buckminster Fuller used to talk about the 12th dimensional aspects of the vector equilibrium system, what was commonly known as the jitterbug model, and as part of his synergetic geometry. I used to get lost at around 3.5. I just haven't. It's above my pay scale at this point to grasp the idea of the 12th dimensional aspect of things.
Yeah.
I think for most of us.
For sure. Limitations. Our education, etc. We have been sort of, I guess, for want of a better word, dumbed down. So these things we have to go out of our way to discover and explore. But if you go with guys like Buckminster Fuller, you mentioned Walter Russell before. I've done a lot of research into Walter Russell, and I'm going to be using a lot of his information today. And another guy who's really good on the internet right now, his name's Ken Wheeler. Top guy. His YouTube channel is called Theoria Apotheosis, and he's the top dog when you're talking about magnetism, dielectricity, and electricity, the three field modalities. So I'll recommend those guys.
For our audience, as well as myself, to get a better picture as an introduction, you're known as Mr. Astrotheology, but I'm not sure I know what that means. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So astros are your stars. Theology is a science. It's not a religion. Theology is teaching about the cosmos, the planets, astrology, and how these magnetic bodies, luminous bodies, are actually affecting historical timelines. You yourself, you're a Sagittarian, I'm an Aries, both fire. So what does that mean? And what does it mean if you're born under the stars of Sagittarius? Does it make you different, and etc.? Well, it does. And astrotheology is the science. It's the magnetic science. So you understand how these energies influence you and how they've influenced theology. I'll give you one little example. Jesus. Everyone knows who Jesus is, right? Now, supposedly...
He's the guy that fixed my tires. No, I'm kidding.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord. So, in astrology, that's Jupiter. Simple. In astrology, Jupiter is he's called a benefic planet, the greater benefic. In theology, he's called the great benefactor. So you'll see a crossover of disciplines, of schools, theology, astrology. And what I teach in syncretism is how these fields come together and they're all integrated as one, and you can understand every science from one perspective. So that's what I'm going to try and bring in today with our subject about 3D and 4D.
I did also, before we skip away from this core aspect of astrology, astrology gets a bad rap from multiple camps, both from the secular camp and also from the religious camp. And can you explain how that's come to be? Because the minute you say astrology to a chunk of the population, they think woo-woo.
Yeah, the religious people will say it's from the devil, and the schooled intellects will say it's a pseudoscience. And neither of those are correct. They are half-truths. So it's not a pseudoscience, it's a science which is a language. So you can't, it's like if you hear a Chinese person and you can't understand it, you're not going to write it off as a pseudo language because they understand it.
They're just making strange noises.
That's right. It works. They can communicate. So, like music, you can't debunk music. You can't debunk a language. Astrology is a language. And it's a language of energy and frequencies. And that's all it is. So the world is made up of two kinds of waves. A radiation wave, which is longitudinal, that's magnetism. And a transverse wave, the Hertz wave, and it hurts. And that's electricity. It vibrates. It's a vibration wave. Now, the vibration wave, the transverse wave, decays. It has a decay factor in it. Whereas the radial wave, longitudinal, two-dimensional, magnetism, does not decay. It goes, permeates the universe forever and ever and always grows. So magnetism, as Faraday and Steinmetz and all of these greats have taught in their equations, that is 10 billion times more powerful than the transverse wave electricity. So when you're looking at a 3D world, it's electrical. The 2D spiritual world, in other words, the causal energy, magnetism, is longitudinal. And it's two-dimensional because it's always propagating along its medium, whether it's air, fire, earth, or water, in a longitudinal expression. And it has no vibration. It's radial. Thank you, Dr. Russell. Walter Russell, he is a doctor. But he explained this clearly, that magnetism, white light, is the source. White light has no vibration. It's pure. Contains all the colours of the spectrum in it. White light is all the colours. Black light is the absence of colour. So when white light splits and produces the phenomena called electricity, red shift, blue shift, vibration, now you have space and time. Electricity is space and time. It's three-dimensional. But the thing with the three-dimensional world, as they tell us, it's Maya, the illusion. But it's not. It's just that it's transient, temporal, and decaying. So it's here one day, it's gone the next. So these buildings here are glorious, made of vibrations, the vibratory wave, red shift, blue shift. And it's what gives us the beautiful dimension that we can express ourselves in. We can go and eat, we can go and have sex, we can play music. We can do all these beautiful things inside of it. But it's our bodies are only vehicles expressing themselves in it and in the effect world. But causally, we stand outside of it. We are magnetic and we are spirit beings. In other words, we are multi-dimensional beings that come through this world in what we call atoms. Our body is an anatomy. Hence, it's made of atoms. And they tell you that they're empty, right? So this expressing ourselves in atoms is how everything manifests in the world. And this is why the greatest, most known maxim in the history of the universe, the Egyptians coined and used always. All is atum. So when you read the Hermetica, the Corpus Hermeticum, you'll see this at the end of every expression, almost. All is atum. And what they were teaching there is that God, the field, the dielectric field, is atomic. But the trick is, what is an atom? This is the key to understanding everything. What really is an atom? Now, they tell you that it's a neutron, a proton, and an electron, and it's true. It's a trinity. There's threefold aspect to an atom. But the keys to understanding what a neutron is and a proton and an electron. So the neutron, that's the dielectric field. It's everywhere. Everywhere in the universe. As Walter Russell put it, everywhere and nowhere come forth all forms. Dielectricity is black light. Magnetism is white light. So when you see the black and white yin and yang, it's telling you there that the Godhead, the field, is both dielectric and magnetic. Dielectricity is stillness. Magnetism is motion. In Sanskrit, mag means to move. So you have the two co-eternal principles, rest and motion. So when motion begins, magnetism, it starts off as a pulse. It pulsates, right? It's all atoms are pulsing at the neutron, at the core of the... If you want to know what an atom really is, it's the torus field. Simple. The torus field, the donut. So at the core of the donut is what's called the hyperbola. So as Ken Wheeler says, you do not speak of a torus field without speaking about its other half, the inverse of a sphere, the hyperbola. So now you have two things. So, and it's in the shape of an hourglass, hence time. That's where time comes from, that hyperbola-shaped hourglass. In the center there, those are units of light. All is light, or sonoluminescence, sound and light. So every atom that exists is a unit of light and sound, sonoluminescence. And it pulsates. As it pulsates, that magnetic motion, magnetism, propagating longitudinally, it encounters resistance in the medium, and resistance vibrates. So you see a pushing longitudinal magnetic wave, and then you see the electrical redshift, blue shift resisting it and causing a transverse wave, and time and space. You see, the space is the wave amplitude, and the time is the wave length. And so everything is about this. It's sonoluminescence, the true nature of things. So I would just go as far as to say it's not a particle wave universe.
It's definitely a wave universe.
True. It's a pulse wave universe. And I got that also from Walter Russell and Ken Wheeler. The pulse is magnetic. The wave is electrical, the electrical wave.
You know, we're at a situation globally right now in America. I know you're from down under, as it were. So I don't know where Australia lives on this chart, but I do know that Americans are 28th on the planet right now as far as science and engineering education. This paucity of science knowledge and education is having a direct effect on how things are working out here. Lest I say, besides the lack of, besides the pure ignorance, it's also a certain level of not exactly blasé, but we are so dazzled by the material realm that when you start talking about things that are scale-wise either bigger or smaller than your sensorial apprehension, we tend to lose people because you can't see, smell, hear what we're talking about necessarily. So how do we bring this cosmic domain into the hamburger stand reality?
Yeah, that's a trick. I know it's very, very difficult. Nonetheless, we have the tools, and people can understand it by analogous thinking. I always use the computer to explain all this. The computer has basically three parts that we understand. The screen, which you could call the body. So I'm going to be talking about spirit, soul, and body, which we're very familiar with. What are these? What is this? So the screen is the body. I see a beautiful picture of you there on my screen and me in the studio. Okay, there it is. Is it real? Are you on that screen? What makes this this visual beauty on my screen? Material visual beauty. Well, it's the RAM, which delivers the information from a file. Now that file essentially is empty, but it's full of information. For instance, if you get a full hard drive and you fill it with megabytes of information, and you get an empty one of the same brand and you weigh them, they weigh the same. The reason is because the full one doesn't weigh more than the empty one, but it's because the information in it is in counter space. It's not spatial. You can't go in there and say, oh, there's the picture of Mark. Oh, very handsome. It's not there. It's zeros and ones. So your spirit, like the file, it's always there in counter space, in the causal realm. And you are projected out like that screen is showing a picture of you. It's the same with your body. It comes from the counterspatial causal realm. It's delivered through Ram, which is your soul. The soul is in between spirit and body. It's the delivery system. So every time you incarnate, you have an opportunity to improve that file. Like when you reboot your computer, that's a reincarnation. You go into the file and you're writing your biography. Every day you add a chapter. Eventually, you're going to have a book. Unless that file gets a virus and gets corrupted, and then, oh no, you lose that, your soul, quote unquote. So you keep that protected. Every time you reboot, you make an improvement. Next day, make another improvement. Turn your computer off, it goes to sleep. That's called death. You don't die. You never die. Nothing can destroy your spirit and soul. You are eternal and immortal. And these fleeting little transient body experience you have, you're here one day, 90 years later, you're in something called a grave, and people go and weep over you and bring you flowers. You're still there. You'll always be there in the non-time spatial 3D world. You've gone out of it. It's like the file. It's there. It's there. It's going to be rebooted one day when, all in due time. It might be not tomorrow. It might be a week. You're busy for a week, so you leave it there for a week. Nonetheless, you will be extracted, come out onto the screen again one day to experience the body world, the physical world. And it's transient because you can't keep the computer on forever. You got to turn it off eventually. So the idea is to make improvements in each incarnation, because when you're sleeping, i.e. dead, you cannot. That's whatever currency you have, whatever goodness, whatever virtue, intelligence, whatever you've accumulated in your life goes with you, and it stays there, and it cannot be corrupted or increased in value. Hence, you will project yourself out by your own decision, because you are God. That's what God is. It's the field. It's not a white bearded guy on the throne. It's reality.
Well, you bring up an interesting point. We have had quite a number of stories, albeit and thankfully overlapping stories, about these deities, as depending on what religion you subscribe to. Earlier today, I had a Hindu artist in my studio, and I pulled out a series of books I stumbled on that are 3 volumes that encompass at least 20,000 Hindu entities. It seemed almost ludicrous to have that many entities. There's got to be an app for that just to keep track. But seriously, so depending on the inculcation, typically from childhood, of a particular mindset based on a known religion, there's some issues there. There are some overlaps, which I know you've spent quite a bit of time studying. My late friend, William Henry Delk, spent a lifetime studying and published on the subject, too, of various comparative religions and how there are archetypal and hierarchical correlatives within each religion that overlap, even etymologically. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, that's what I do in syncretism and astrotheology. It's comparative religion, or in other words, comparative science, because as the great Thomas H. Burgoyne said, they are the 2 sides of the same coin, and yet they're killing each other because science doesn't accept religion, and religion poo-poos science, and yet there they are the 2 sides of the same coin. So when you're looking at the 330 million Hindu gods, all you're doing is you are teaching of different magnitudes of magnetism. Magnetism is God. Or you could say dielectricity it's the field.
Why magnetism versus gravity, let's say?
Okay, well, gravity is gravitation, according to Walter Russell. He says there's two: redshift, radiation; blue shift is gravitation. So a torus field, you'll see that from the center issues lines of force of magnetism, and they go back around, loop around, and then they come back in centripetally converging, whereas radiation, redshift, is diverging centrifugal light. So thank you, Ken Wheeler. So, and he has a ferrocell where he shows a magnet. He puts a magnet behind a viewing film called a ferrocell, and you can see clearly every magnet is a torus field.
Oh, yeah, the Earth itself is that way.
Absolutely, everything is. Your body is. It's
Exactly.
called an aura. And funny thing is, you have a torso. Well, that's just a scrambled version of torus field. Torso, torus, anatomy, atoms. You'll find that your body is already telling you how you are constructed. It's electrical, and the cause of the electrical vibration of your body is magnetic. Now, there's a great guy called John Mawelski. He's got a video on YouTube, an elderly gentleman in his 90s by now, and he talks about magnetricity, where he quotes all of these greats like Faraday and who's the other guy? I'm trying to think of, starting with an S.
Helmholtz, no.
No, around the time of Faraday.
Schrodinger.
Anyway, we'll
Maxwell.
Maxwell, not an S yet. Maxwell and Faraday. So, is that coming through all right?
Yeah.
I can hear a vibration. Okay, so they calculated that back in the day that magnetism is 10 billion times more powerful than electricity. So Mawelski says, just understand it simply. Magnetism is spiritual. You ain't never going to see it. It's back of electricity. Electricity is material. It's physical. You can touch it. These atoms are empty. That's an electrical phenomenon. Everything in the universe, it's an electrical universe. And then when Brahma breathes out his cosmos, right, it's electricity, and then he breathes it back in, inspires and destroys the universe. Well, that's just the temporal nature of the universe. But it goes back to the magnetic cause as a blueprint, and he just breathes it out again. And we've had many worlds. Walter Russell said, this Earth has been here for billions of years and hosted billions of civilizations. We think we're here for 6,000 years. He says, oh, please, let's not limit ourselves. We have been here many times and keep coming back, and this world just comes and goes and pulsates.
Is there anyone with any real intelligence that thinks that the Earth has been here for 6,000 years?
No, not these days. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's at least 8.5 billion years, which is one breath of Brahma, not to mention the trillions of years of Krishna's breath, of Vishnu's, and then the gazillions of years of Krishna's breath. Who are these gods? Well, they're just different magnitudes of magnetism, right? Walter Russell says there's no such thing as neutrons and neutrinos and all of these different things. They're all just different frequencies. Hydrogen is a different frequency to plutonium at the other end. They're just frequencies of light, of sonoluminescence. And so he says they're just measuring different orders of magnitude of magnetism. It's always magnetism. So it's what I call the mother, the Virgin Mother. You have a beautiful picture of a goddess that looks like the Statue of Liberty with 7 rays on her head. You see this white.
Oh, that's actually at the Wilsonian Museum. It's a bronze by Alexander Calder Sr. It's called Star Maiden.
Great. I'm glad you mentioned that so people can go and check it out. You'll always see the goddess, the white, pure Virgin Mary goddess with 7 rays on her head. Well, that's the white light of the sun and the 7 refracted lights of the rainbow, which we have in our body. Violet at the crown chakra, red at the bottom. So the rainbow colour is in us. And all of those are different lights of refracted white light. Sri Yukteswar, 100 years ago in his book, The Holy Science, said these are electricities. They're all different electricities. There are 7 in the universe, and they correspond to our senses. One electricity is only dealing with sound, another one with hearing, another one with smell, etc. And he said, and where I come from, there's the Aborigines. They call it the rainbow serpent. There you go again, the rainbow. You see, and you'll find that in all of our mythologies, Snow White and the 7 dwarves, Noah and his 7 ark people, family members who were in his ark. Well, the ark is the rainbow. It's the ark of the rainbow, Noah's boat. It's not a literal story. It's always referring to that white light, which is the cause of the 7 rays, which are the 7 electricities, which produce the physical phenomena of the universe. Thank you, Walter Russell.
Well, I know you're deep into the numerological aspects as well of all of these things, since there's correlatives everywhere you look. But most of the time, the little research I've done in getting ready for the show, I know that you talk about the recurring number 12, and apparently there are also recurring number 7s.
12 and 7. Alvin Boyd Kuhn, one of the great writers of the early 1900s, esoteric writer, Alvin Boyd Kuhn, I use his work a lot. He said that the 12ness of the universe is it's like the tuning key of the mental nature of the universe. 12 is mind. It's the mind of the cosmos, of God, quote unquote. 7 is the physical body of the nature. Manly P. Hall said that man will always look for 7s because he is a septenarian. He has 7 in his body, 7 chakras, 7 vital organs, 7 this, that, and the other in the body, and 12. We have 12 cranial nerves. We have 12 chakras in our heart chakra. We have 12 nerve ganglion endings in our solar plexus. We have 12 systems of the body, skeletal, cerebrospinal, pulmonary, cardiovascular, etc. There are 12, exactly. So we see this play. Music, I'm a musician. There are 12 chromatic notes. There are 7 diatonic. Everywhere you go, there's the fullness of 12 and then 7 interacting with it. The 7 visible planets of the solar system, the 12 signs of the zodiac. So the 12 signs of the zodiac are mental, and they are passively out there. And as the 7 go around and churn and turn and pop in each sign, they bring and channel energy into the cosmos from that mental nature of the cosmos. And that's why you've got the 12 Titans and the 7 Olympians fighting against each other. You see, it's that interplay between the passive and the active nature of the universe.
And we're back with Santos Bonacci, and we're talking about astrotheology and quite a number of things. I wanted to ask you, Santos, being from down under, what is the current state of the Aborigines' rights and the awareness, just how woke is the government in terms of not necessarily reparations, but that wouldn't be a bad place to start.
Yeah. So it's pretty similar to here. They're on reservations. So what happened was when corporate, let's call it Europe, I guess, visited them with ships on their lands with treaties and contracts, it was written in legalese. It's not in plain English. There's 2 languages that we speak in English, and legalese is a register of English, and unfortunately we've been taught that at school, so we're going around speaking legalese. So what happened was they were tricked. That's why the Indians said white man speaks with forked tongue. He's not talking about you and I. He's talking about the lawyers who tricked them. So they've been tricked. They've signed themselves into like a subservient maritime straw man entity, and they've given over their rights simply. But they've always been leaders and people who are there in the communities of both countries to provoke people and wake them up. You mentioned the word before, the Hopi word for someone who provokes.
Yes, I called you, yes. They have a Heyoka medicine.
Yeah, and I've been called that many times, a Heyoka. So
contrarian.
Yep, someone who makes people think, and tries to wake them up because, you have empathy, I guess, or you see things from a different perspective to what you've been taught, and you just want a better world for people. It's just compassion. It's just a humane way to be.
Do you see the needle moving? Are we collectively getting woke?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the small component of society that has always been there and always been woke is sort of growing and strengthening in its in its resolve to manifest and materialize that golden world that is just around the corner. Really, we just have to invert a few things and we're there. Paradise is.
Bucky used to actually. There's a beautiful epic poem called. Wrote a beautiful poem called "Utopia or Oblivion," and that's where we're posed.
Yep, paradise or hell. Paradise, purgatory, and hell. They're just conditions. They're not places. And the earth has both, all of them. And it's our choice. And once we reach critical mass, and enough of these woke people actually establish themselves and believe in each other and have a model and live by it and stick with it, it's going to spill over and essentially bless everyone, even the people who are not awakened. They're just waiting for leaders and
a cue.
Yeah, they're good. They're good people. They're not woke. That's all. And if they go to church and the pastors don't teach rubbish, which they do, and really teach what I'm teaching, true astrotheology, the true science of religion, etc., and then they go to school and they're actually not taught pseudoscience, which they do, they could be teaching stuff like Walter Russell, and this sort of stuff would wake people up, but it doesn't get a foot in the door because the money powers have structured it, like the Rockefeller foundations and everything, that they've structured it so that, for instance, naturopathy goes out, allopathy comes in. That's one example in the medical field. But the same is with science. They teach a lot of stuff that can't be understood. For instance, I believe that the atomic model, as Walter Russell wrote in his Atomic Suicide.
Yes, I was going to mention that.
It's wrong and it's hurting people. And these days, I am so keen, really, really keen, to teach them the Walter Russell model and all of these other greats, Ken Wheeler, John Mawelski, and all of these guys, Tesla, who really nailed it. And I believe, my belief is that that's where you start. What is an atom? Once you understand what an atom is, you have the keys to the kingdom. You'll never be asleep again. That's where it all begins, physics. Philosophy is made up of three pillars, logic, ethics, and physics. Plato, he was always logical. He was always ethical, right? All these great ones, Pythagoras, but they always taught physics. But not as we know it, like, gold and all these particles, which Walter Russell said there are no particles. Even J.J. Thomson, the discoverer of the electron, said in his book and in his dying days, it's not a particle.
Yes, there's no thing there.
No. And that's why I say it's a pulse wave universe. It's not a particle wave universe. And the double slit experiment actually proves that it's a pulse. That's why it disappears when you don't observe it, and when you look at it, then the wave turns up and the particle disappears. It didn't, because it wasn't a particle; it was a pulse. You can't see a pulse.
Yes, the Thomas Young two-slit experiment.
Yeah, Thomas Young. There you go. He was the first one, original, who did it.
Also, a man who has come to my attention again after some years, David Bohm, who is a theoretical physicist. He happened to be a student of Muktananda as well, and he had a very deep sort of metaphysical and spiritual side. But David Bohm is someone worth looking into. I stumbled upon him again last night when I was researching a comment you made during one of your podcasts that a photon does not exist, and I was having a hard time understanding what you mean by that, because I know people who actually can generate singular photons through some methodology in laser physics that they do. So as I said, this is a little beyond my pay scale, but I do want to research it a little further. And I noticed Bohm came up in this article in New Scientist magazine back in 1994, titled "Does a Photon Exist?" So thank you for setting me back on a path, sort of backward, but I absolutely admire David Bohm. He was one of the first people who publicly, a noted theoretical physicist who started talking about the holographic paradigm of the universe. And this was back in the 70s when the sort of the nascent New Age movement was occurring. There was a gal named Marilyn Ferguson who published the Brain Mind Bulletin, and also more famously a book called The Aquarian Conspiracy. And anyhow, David Bohm is someone worth looking into if you're not familiar with him.
Yep, I'm not. But does it exist? Yes, it does. I hope the quote that you were quoting there was complete, in that I would have said, hopefully, that the photon doesn't exist as we are taught.
Exactly.
Because there's no particles. But it does exist, and it's a pulse.
Got it.
Sonoluminescence. It's pulsating radially. Like, just imagine, you drop a pebble in a pond, and you'll see you can call that the pulse. And what it does is it generates little circles that always are growing. Well, that's a radial wave.
Yeah, omnidirectional.
Yeah, exactly. And longitudinal. Right? In water, it's longitudinal, but in air, it goes omnidirectional. But there's no vibration. It just goes straight. And then what happens is it encounters resistance, ohms, om. That's why they say om.
That was actually named after somebody.
Yeah, I know it is, exactly. But always pay attention to those things, and you'll see that they always...
Right. No coincidences.
For instance, J.J. Thomson and... what's the other guy? Young, you mentioned? Thomas.
Well, I mentioned Jim Urtak, and I mentioned Walter Young. I'm sorry,
Thomas Young.
Thomas Young, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
They are crucial figures in the science of electricity and magnetism, and both have Tom in their names. J.J. Thomson and Thomas Young. These things always turn up. The universe is singing to us. So on the resistance, right? That is always a transverse wave, always. Whereas the radial magnetic wave, pure and clean, non-vibratory, that is always expanding and growing, whereas the other one is always diminishing, decaying. Hence, you have this dichotomy. You have the monad god and the dyad god, magnetism and electricity. That's all it is. The demiurge, the bad god, according to the Gnostic Nag Hammadic texts and all those gospels, they tell you about this demiurgic world of archons, and it's like an abortion, and it's such a horrible world, and it's evil, etc. All they're doing is they're just using colourful language to say that this world is not as good as the causal world, where we always return and we are always in bliss, and there's no pleasure, pain, dichotomy. It's only bliss. There's only one thing, pure bliss and pure activity, where you're not decaying and dying and worrying about bills, and you're just doing all the normal things that you do on this plane. You're eating and drinking and having sex, etc., in that plane, but it's transcendental. It doesn't vibrate. That's the only difference.
Well, interesting. Mm-hmm. I still suggest you use protection.
For sure.
So how does somebody who is inculcated or grown up with, let's call it the conventional wisdom, if it is wisdom, that is imparted by our clergy, flip the script and look beneath the rug at what is the causal reason for all of these religions to have these dogmas, let's say?
Yeah, well, this is all corporate religion, okay, because underlying they have their sacred texts. All these religions have their sacred texts. I would bypass the teachers of those texts, and I would go direct to them and get direct knowledge from the scriptures. They're beautiful. The Bible, Bhagavad Gita, Zendavesta. I've read all these. These are sacred wisdom, and you get direct knowledge. You bypass them. For instance, I'll give you an example. Tom tells me, he's my best friend, he tells me that his car's blue. So I go around telling everybody that Tom's car is blue. Little do I know that he's colourblind. Although I trust him, he's never told me a lie. He's a trustworthy, good man. But he's colourblind. I didn't go to his garage, open the door and check that it's actually in fact red. So I've become an inadvertent liar by teaching second-hand, parrot-repeated my truth, or his truth. So this is how direct knowledge is what is so important. Bypass those guys, man, with their doctrine and their religions. Religions are like tunnels. You go in a tunnel to get to the other side. So if you're stuck in a religion, anyone listening, it's a tunnel. You've got to get to the other side. You will be stained and tainted by their doctrines because they cannot afford to teach them to you the way they really are, because you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. They want to keep you there.